Hello, people.
Hey, Irfan, how are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm good. I think we have enough presents. Let's start the meeting.
Yeah, sure.
Let me just pull the. Is there anything specific on agenda today? I don't think.
Yeah, we have a few things on here. The first one is around using deployments instead of stateful sets for the Federation controller, I think.
Correct.
I answered this question on the comment on the issue. My understanding from a conversation I had with the KubeBuilder devs, and this was in response to my having the same question that everyone else seems to be having, like why does KubeBuilder default to using stateful sets? And the answer I got back was something like, deployments do not guarantee that only a single instance will be running, even if you have replicas equals 1. When you do a changeover, like you change the image or something to do an upgrade, it may be that the existing replica set that the deployment is managing is not spun down in a coordinated fashion with the new replica set, such that you could have more than one instance running at a time. Whereas stateful sets is much more careful about ensuring that only the number of instances you ask for are actually running at any given time. So I feel free to confirm this with either the AppSig or the KubeBuilder devs, but that's the reason that we're using stateful sets for now. And until we hear something else, I don't think we should be switching to deployments.
That makes sense. We've definitely seen a number of cases where replica sets, like the guarantee that replica sets and before them replication controllers had, is that you will converge on the number of replicas, where you may be in a state where you have replica count X and you have X plus 2 or X times 2 replicas running, and the contract is that you converge on the correct number of replicas rather than you never go over. And it sounds like the same, that's fundamentally the concern that motivated the KubeBuilder team to default to using stateful sets, right, Maru?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah, I think that seems fine. I think, yeah, it was more like query kind of a thing, I believe.
I mean, that could change in the future if we end up using something like leader election, where we have a way of managing the relationship between multiple instances. But until that time, we can just use stateful set.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's also fine with me.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next one was around the image tag, and I'm not sure, looking at the agenda, like who put that item on the agenda and what the question or discussion topic is. So maybe if someone is present and added that, they can talk.
Yeah. Sorry, I think, okay, I missed that. Okay. So actually, it was there in the last item also, last week item also. I'm thinking we still have that confusion around the tags. Like we have latest, we have master, we have canary.
Shashi, I think you missed the meeting last time and we didn't think about this item post that.
Sure.
So we had a discussion about this, and the conclusion was that the latest refers to the latest release. So whichever is the latest release, latest will point to that. Canary is the one which is actually the master, the head of master, and there would be release text version with the release number.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I tell you what, as an action item to follow up, since there was still a question present, like I'm going to be making some polls to add documentation for different things, like different features, etc. And I can take an action item here to document the image tag strategy so that we don't have any more confusion since it's not written down. Does that sound good to folks?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I'll make an issue for that now and record it in the notes.
Yeah, Paul, you did mention, I think you have put the status API as the next item.
Yeah, I'm going to just create this issue to follow up on the image tag stuff. One sec.
Sure.
Okay, I made an issue and put it in the notes. I'll send a PR for that one later today. So
Thank you.
for the status API, we at Red Hat were having some internal discussion about the poll that you made, Shashi, and during that discussion, we kind of realized that we think there are some complications with propagated version that won't work correctly if the status is part of the template resource.
Okay.
And Maru, I don't know if you want to talk through those briefly, but we felt after that it would probably be best if status was on a separate resource.
I think that there's, that's kind of part of it. Shashi, have you had a chance to read the comment I made?
Yeah.
PR?
Yeah, I went through. Actually, yeah, I've been facing some difficulties in updating the status using the resource client. While I realized this while doing a task, but ideally it works in E2E, so I'm a little confused actually. Yeah, either way it should be fine. We felt like if we update the status in the template, it would be easy for the user to get the status for the objects, tagging that particular object. So if it is a separate API object by itself, I think it would be little inconvenience for the user. That's the only concern we had actually.
But if we step back for just a second, there's kind of two decisions to make, and
Sure.
they're related. So the first one was, does collection of status happen in the sync controller or not?
Okay.
And I described sort of reasons why putting it in the sync controller, if we want to have a degree of separation between propagation and status collection, because some features that might use the status might not actually depend on propagation, for example, DNS. So that kind of suggests that we need to make a decision about whether we want to have that dependency or not. And if we don't, then that would imply collecting status separately from the sync controller. But the caveat to that decision is if status is collected outside of the sync controller, then there's no longer a way to coordinate updates to propagated version, because updates to status will affect that. And the way that your PR is written today, it actually coordinates the writing of the propagated version so that it can know the version of the template after the status is written. But as soon as it's
Yeah.
in a separate controller, that can't be coordinated, and that's what would influence storing the status separately. If you can't coordinate the propagated version right, then putting it in a separate resource allows you to avoid having to coordinate the propagated version right. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I was kind of bringing this up not as, this is the way we need to go. It's just I think we've been kind of, at least I've been laboring under the impression that we do want to avoid imposing dependencies between different components. In this case, we're, avoiding that dependency is going to impose a cost. It effectively will mean that we need separate status objects. And so I wanted to sort of raise that as an issue so we could discuss it as a group.
Yep, it makes sense. Yep.
So are you in agreement that, we should have a separate status collection and separate status resources, or just I've explained the problem and now you can think about it?
Yeah, I understand the problem. So I think I agree with this argument. I think I'm fine with putting the status in a separate resource.
And collecting it separately? Is that the implication too?
Yeah, collecting it separately.
Okay.
Yes, apart from sync controller. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I shared the concerns about the UX, but I think there are things that we could probably do to make the user experience better in terms of providing a single view that encompasses templates, overrides, placement, status, potentially, that people would be able to relate to if they so chose, if they chose to do that. I think there are things we can do at like a higher level to improve the UX around, the problem of having all this information in different resources, basically.
Yeah, I also have a similar opinion, Paul. So I think user experience is something that we need to focus on now. A couple of months ago, I think this talk did happen, that how do we present this API to the user. And I think if we already have good number of separate resources and one more additional resource, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's getting unwildly like if a user actually has to propagate some resources or say federate some resources, we already are talking about three primary or the base resources, and then if the user needs to know what's happening with them, then we are talking about one more.
Well,
So
at least two, because overrides, strictly speaking, are optional, and not all resources will use them. But I agree that we have a lot of different. I like thinking about these things as primitives, and to me that reminds me that this is not necessarily what the user will be interacting with. This is what we need in order to have the system work. And I think if we can sort of think about those two things separately, like this is what allows push propagation to be functional and have all the characteristics that we want, and then how do we present the user something on top of that. The idea that the API has to be just like that's the only user experience, I think that works if you're dealing with things that are kind of designed for designed for Kubernetes, like deployments. Deployments are actually kind of on the edge of that, to be honest. But things like replica sets or pods, they're simple enough that they work well with the Kubernetes API. But once you start layering like more complicated semantics on top, I would argue that the API as a user experience, it becomes less optimal, like the more complicated things are. And that to me, like Federation is like an order of magnitude more complicated than most of the things that are part of core Kubernetes. And so I think like finding different ways to present that complexity to the user is maybe a better approach, as opposed to trying to shoehorn the complexity that we have into like an API that's user friendly. And that could be, I mean, if we could just like off the top of my head, if we were to have an aggregated API server that allowed us to present a single resource per, like, instead of having template placement override, you know, you could have a logical API resource like federated X that actually aggregated all that information together as different sections in a type that was, you know, it would effectively write different resources underneath, but the user would just see one. And not just an API version, but the other option is you have like some sort of, you know, web interface that does exactly that same thing. You know, you want to update, you know, the placement and the template and the override and see the status all in one place. We can do that. We're limited in the API, I think, to how we represent things, especially around like how we do versioning. And I don't know if there's a way to make that super simple.
Yeah, I've also thought about an idea kind of similar to what Maru has described, although as someone with deep experience on aggregated API servers, I'd prefer to implement it with another CRD because aggregated API servers are quite expensive, but that's another discussion topic. I think the main point that I would focus on is that, like, it seems like it might be more usable and also potentially potentially easier to like adapt existing workloads into if we had a resource that encompassed like all of the different primitives that we've built, and that might be what users would prefer to relate to. I do think, though, that we've done the right thing in terms of making distinctions between the primitives, so that we've implemented things in kind of a decomposed way that gives us more flexibility in terms of how we ultimately present them to the user. But to just like move the conversation back up a level, what I'm hearing is that we're all interested in improving the user experience now that we've built the set of the basic primitives, right?
Yes, that is correct. And to be honest, like I'll give you an example of a user experience that we are thinking at our group. And the reason we have written some high-level controllers is, so one level of direct, something like usable through kubectl or direct API interaction is something similar to, say for deployments, a user creates a high-level API and a template. And high-level API, which is in our case, the one that I did a PR for, is named replica scheduling preference and a template related to that. And these are the only two resources user needs to create. The overrides and the placements are calculated and updated. And then further, we were thinking that the status can also be collected, which is part of template. So a user basically needs to deal with only two resources. Like what you mentioned, that we can aggregate all of these, and then we have thought about that also. One insane kind of a thing is like, again, like what we did in Federation V1, have special meaning for each of the fields, which is part of, say, deployment resource, and present that itself to the user, like, again. But it's like added complexity. You partition that resource again, what we were doing in Federation V1, and then create Federation V2 APIs out of it. I mean, I'm just saying that this is also similar to what you're talking about, aggregating and presenting that as a single resource to the user.
Yeah.
Call it federated X or.
So one thing that I've been thinking about, Irfan, and I wonder if you have an opinion about this, is so right now we've got the replica set scheduling preferences as like a higher level controller And one thing I wonder is when I'm thinking about all the different higher level controllers that people may want to write is, do you foresee that people would want to migrate between higher level controllers? Like say that you start out using replica set or replica scheduling preferences, and you then want to migrate to another controller that adds additional functionality, like maybe it's replica scheduling preferences, but there's maybe another controller with a separate API that allows you also to consider, you know, like as a random example, pricing changes in the clouds, like different cloud providers. Do you have you all thought at all about different high level controllers, like adopting and then let's say I guess the symmetric pair of adoption is emancipation, like emancipated miners. Do you have you all thought about like the possibility of people like moving resources, trading off between different high level controllers, like during upgrades or anything like that?
To be honest, no.
Okay.
So as of now, focus has been that we should be able to provide higher level controllers which makes some sense with respect to the resources and which makes the user experience for that push model easier.
Right. So the reason that I ask is because as I've been thinking through, you know, the concept that maybe there's a higher level resource that is what the user relates to. That, for example, forget replica scheduling preferences for now. Maybe that just ties together the different, shall we say, like universal primitives of like template override placement status.
Yeah.
One thing I've wondered about is like, would we want to associate like higher level controllers with those things? Or would we want to keep those separate? So for example, the question specifically would be like, say I'm going to make a higher level resource that has the UX that I think is a little better, that incorporates the different, you know, primitives. Do I want to add an entanglement with that and like a higher level controller, or do I want to keep the higher level controller separate so that I can switch between it without changing, you know, the resource that I primarily interact with in terms of the UX? Does that make any sense? Did I get my English right there and make it?
Yeah, I got what you're talking about. So I guess it makes more sense to keep these two separate. The reason being, like aggregating the four API types you mentioned applies more generically to all the resources. So it can as well apply to any arbitrary resource, what we talk about. Whereas a higher level controller might be considered as a more custom implementation or more specific implementation to a given API type. For example, for jobs, it might be something else, and for deployments, it might be something else, and it doesn't apply to any other type except that particular type.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it kind of indicates to me that we should keep higher level controllers separate as well for the reasons you stated.
Yep. Yeah, but I think it's good that we actually kickstarted this talk about presenting more easier usable API. Maybe a different group or a different layer. I'm not sure what to call it, but we probably can take it as a next step. And to conclude the talk about status that we were having earlier, if this is our next step, then I think it's okay to keep status as a separate resource also.
Okay. as a meta point, I will just make the observation that I think the fact that we're at the point where we can talk about this means that we have made a little progress.
Yeah. Cool. Something fruitful.
Do we have any other agenda items for today?
Yeah, Paul. So I still have one topic, and I have just appended in Google Doc. So this topic is about the logging part. Because currently in Federation WG, we have some controllers using same file names. So when we print the log, we will find that many same files logging syslog, but actually those logs are from different controllers. So it's very difficult for debug. So currently, I have just opened an issue, and I got some answer from the community, and the proposal is that we can possibly use the log. Maybe you can open the ticket, and there is a solution that we can use the log the long file. Maybe we can use this one to print all the whole file paths, so that this can make sure that the end user will have a full view of which file print the log. So this can help us for debugging.
This is for the log package, right? Rather than glog.
Yeah, right. Because in Federation have how many controllers, and those controllers have same name named as controller.go. So when those controllers print out some logs, they will all start with controller.go as the file name. So it's difficult to see which controller print the log. So it's better that we have different paths of the file for different controllers, so that we can easily check which controller print the log.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be much more, make the logs much more usable. I want to say I have seen a way to do this with glog, actually.
Yeah.
The specifics aren't coming to mind, but I am fairly certain that there is a way to get glog to do this.
Okay. I'm not sure if Kubebuilder also has an issue, or how did you handle the logs in Kubebuilder?
Kubebuilder uses log, which is not what Federation V2 historically used. So the only controller that was using log was the federated type config up until last week. And now I don't think we should be using log at all outside of Kubebuilder code.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think that maybe for the coming 0.2 release, maybe we need to do some enhancement for the logs, because sometimes the customer may want to debug the controller by reading the logs. So it's better that we can provide a solution to help the customer to debug the controller more easily. Yeah.
Yeah, Paul, you can post, maybe you can find out how that is possible using a path of a file name using log, and we'll post it on the issue. And Wanya, thanks for bringing this. This is useful. So if there is a mechanism with glog, we can all use that. And
Okay.
if not, then we can continue the discussion on the issue.
Okay. I will check, but currently I found that in Kubernetes, they are using different file names for different controllers, so that this can make sure that that the log will print out with different file names. But based on more comments, we may need to find a more efficient and simple way to handle the logs. Okay.
Yeah, there is an issue actually with having the whole path of the file name as part of log, which is it increases the size of the logs at least by 50%. So because I mean you can understand the reason, and sometimes those paths could be fairly long. So we can choose. I mean, it's a trade-off. We can choose if it's easier for debuggability, then we can probably follow that.
I mean, we could
Yeah,
just have
so
separate builds. I mean, the idea of like a debug build, you know, in C or
Yeah,
something where
correct.
you have symbolic debugging, like you have symbols compiled in, and we just have more than one. So if the user is having a problem, they can go and swap in an image that has a debug logging enabled.
Yep, that's correct.
I mean, hopefully this would just be something you configure via flags, but I'm hearing that's not really possible.
Irvan, so do you mean there are some tickets in Kubernetes also treating the same issue?
No. I did not mean that. And Maru, that should be possible, right? So based on, I mean, if we can universally apply in our code based on a flag, which might be specific to the controllers, you could be using different API.
Like I would hope so. It's just when I was looking at the issue that was linked in the agenda, it looked like at least on the log side of things, you have to pass like say the trim option at compile
Yeah.
time.
So the
Like,
point is that the call would be different. It's not like easy as just using a different log level as in log.
No, I don't think it's that the call would be different. It's more that, like, ideally, in my perfect world, you'd be able to pass a flag to your binary, and it would determine how the logging was performed. But what I'm seeing suggests you actually have to compile the binary with flags that then influence how it logs. Am I missing something?
No, I haven't seen the issue, but if that is the case, then it doesn't seem right.
Like, it's annoying, but I mean, it would be. That's why I was suggesting, like, you could have a debug build versus, a non-debug build, and that would just have different levels of logging compiled in. But if we can find a way to do it just at runtime, or like, when you run the binary, you set how you want logging to occur, that would be much better if that's possible.
Oh, okay. More so, you mean that it is better that we can add a parameter into controller so that we can turn on the log dynamically?
Ideally, I mean, if it's something that can be influenced that way, great. I mean, just like, my concern is that when I was looking at your issue, having to pass like trim path via GC flags, like, that doesn't suggest that we'll be able to do that. Yeah. Anyway, this is kind of like just a technical discussion. I'm sure we can sort it out offline. I mean, I think we all would like to have more useful logs. That's kind of my takeaway.
Yeah. Okay.
Last thing.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss about the Helm chart actually. So I think probably if others haven't had a look, probably can have a look. So I have a few expectations from that Helm chart actually. So mainly it was like we should be able to replace the method what we are using currently, like the script. So I think using Helm chart, I feel some steps are not done by that Helm chart, like probably like name specification probably, and then joining the clusters, which current script is doing. I think we should write a wrapper around a Helm chart. Probably it would be easier to replace, like the current deploy federation is there. So similar method using Helm chart, you deploy it. Otherwise, we might need to add user documentation, like how to do using Helm chart. For now, if we can find a way we can do everything using Helm chart, that would be great. So that's one step. Given that there is no tests in CI, I think it is difficult whether whatever changes is done is good enough. So I tried pulling it manually, but I need to assume some things, and tried doing that. I was not successful. So I would like some more highs on that. I think probably it looks good, the chart wise, but I needed some tests.
Yeah, I actually was wondering it, what we felt needed to be done further on the Helm chart in that pull request versus as a next step. And I guess Shashi, I agree. I think we need to have a wrapper script like you suggest. Do you think that's part of the first pull, or is that something that could be done in a follow-up?
Well, the advantage of doing it in the first pull would be that we would be able to have people replicate it. Like, it's not like I tested it manually, but it's like, no, it's working in CI. We should be able to use those instructions to get started. Sorry, Shashi. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, the same opinion. I think it should be good if we can do it in the first PR. I think it won't be too much trouble, I believe.
Okay. Okay, so one comment, because if you want to use the charts, please make sure that you are using Helm version 2.10 because we need because it will request the Helm need to handle the CRD install annotation. So that because we need to make sure that the CRD resources will be created first. Yeah.
Yeah, Guangya, you can add that as some user comments or user documentation as part of the PR.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess I would echo Shashi's concern. Like, I don't think, at least initially, that Helm is going to do everything the deployment script does. And I think the goal would be like replacing as much of the deployment script with its Helm equivalent, but recognizing that at least for now, we're still going to need a wrapper around that. And part of that, I think, is there's kind of a separation between, like, a Helm chart is, I want to deploy Federation, I'm the user. And if we can reuse that in deploying for testing CI and development, great. But I mean, I think it's important to know that they are actually separate use cases. The user may want to join arbitrary clusters. For development, we want to join very specific clusters that, we've deployed ourselves, in CI or whatever. So.
Okay. So Shashi and Guanya, you're going to work to get the chart PR landed then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, last item was I did post the jobs PR that I did raise, high-level job controller needs a review. So if somebody can please volunteer. Apart from Gongya, he already did basic review.
I started looking at that one, Irfan, and I realized that it was more to review than I gave it time for.
Okay, cool. That's fine. I'll wait.
Yeah, I know that that's one that you wanted to have for ODA2. So
correct. And I'm in process of having, so what that PR does is a simple planner. So the algorithm of distribution of job parallelism and completions is quite simple. I'm working on a more complicated, let me call it a more complicated planner, which can do the job planning, observing the completions and parallelism from the clusters. So I am hoping that it can also land before ODA2.
So what you're saying is that after your pull shreds my brain, you're going to shred the shreds even smaller.
No, this is not going to shred your brain. Be aware of that, because algorithm is very simple.
Well, it's kind of a trick question because my brain is already 85% recycled pulp.
Anyways, thanks a lot in advance.
No problem.
Okay, I think there is nothing further to discuss. So I'll see you guys next week.
All right. See ya.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
Okay,
Thank you.
see you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.